The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Prince William stood before an ornate mirror in his private chambers. His reflection showed a man carrying the weight of centuries on his shoulders, yet his eyes held a quiet determination that had grown stronger with each passing year. Today was different from any other day in his life. Today he would become king. Sarah, his longtime dresser and confidant, approached with careful steps, carrying what appeared to be an ordinary wooden box. But William knew better. This box had traveled through generations, holding secrets that only the royal family understood. As she placed it gently on the mahogany table beside him, William's hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of what lay ahead. "Your Majesty," Sarah whispered, using the title that still felt foreign to both of them. "Shall we begin?" William nodded silently, his thoughts drifting to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, whose strength had guided the nation for over 7 decades. Her passing had left a void that seemed impossible to fill, yet here he stood, ready to try. The responsibility felt heavier than any crown he would wear today. As Sarah opened the box, the first item revealed made William's breath catch in his throat. It was his mother's handkerchief, delicately embroidered with forget-me-nots, Princess Diana's favorite flower. The pale blue silk seemed to glow in the morning light, and for a moment, William was transported back to his childhood, when his mother would tuck him into bed with stories of brave princes and kind kings. "She wanted you to carry a piece of her with you on this day," Sarah explained softly, her own eyes misting over. "The Queen had this specially prepared years ago, knowing that one day—" William couldn't speak. He reached out with reverent fingers to touch the delicate fabric, remembering his mother's gentle hands and warm smile. Diana had always told him that being royal meant serving others, putting the people's needs before his own. Today, more than ever, her words rang true in his heart. The handkerchief wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of love that transcended death. Diana had been taken from him when he was just 15, leaving behind lessons about compassion and humanity that had shaped him into the man he'd become. Now, as he prepared to lead a nation, her spirit would be with him, tucked safely in his coat pocket, close to his heart. Sarah carefully lifted the handkerchief and showed William the corner where his grandmother had added her own touch. In the way, finest golden thread, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were the initials E.R. Elizabeth Regina. Even in her final years, the Queen had thought of this moment, ensuring that both the women who had loved William most would be part of his greatest day. The emotion in the room was palpable. William closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the presence of 2 remarkable women who had shaped not just his life, but the lives of millions around the world. His mother's compassion and his grandmother's duty would guide him as he stepped into his new role. Outside the palace windows, crowds were already gathering along the coronation route. Thousands of people from every corner of the Commonwealth had traveled to witness this historic moment. They carried flags and flowers, their faces bright with anticipation and hope. Many held photographs of Diana, showing that her memory lived on in the hearts of people everywhere. Among the crowd, elderly veterans stood alongside young families, all united by their love for the monarchy and their hope for the future. Street vendors sold commemorative items, but the most precious souvenirs were the memories being made. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, their eyes wide with wonder, not fully understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing, but sensing its importance nonetheless. Back in the palace, William's thoughts turned to Catherine, his beloved wife, who was preparing in her own chambers with their children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been practicing their roles for weeks, understanding that today their father would become something more than just their dad. The weight of legacy was already touching their young lives, just as it had touched his decades earlier. The morning continued with careful precision, each moment building toward the ceremony that would change everything. William knew that millions of eyes around the world would be watching, analyzing every detail, every expression, every gesture. But in this quiet moment, surrounded by memories and love, he felt a peace he hadn't expected. Sarah began to lay out the rest of his attire, each piece carefully chosen and laden with meaning. The coronation robes had been worn by kings before him, carrying the hopes and dreams of generations. But it was the small personal touches that would make this ceremony uniquely his. Uniquely William's tribute to the women who had made him who he was. As he prepared to leave his chambers and begin the most important day of his life, William whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. For his mother's love that continued to guide him, for his grandmother's example that had shown him the true meaning of service, and for the opportunity to carry their legacy forward into a new era. The next item Sarah revealed from the wooden box made William's composure waver completely. It was his grandfather, Prince Philip's naval compass, small and weathered from decades of faithful service. The brass had developed a rich patina, and tiny scratches told stories of adventures across the world's oceans. Philip had carried this compass during his time in the Royal Navy, navigating through some of the most dangerous waters during World War II. William picked up the compass with both hands, feeling its familiar weight. His grandfather had given it to him years ago during one of their private walks around the Balmoral estate. "A king must always know his direction," Philip had said in his characteristically direct manner. "Not just where he's going, but where he's come from." The old Duke of Edinburgh had been a man of few sentimental words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had spent over 70 years supporting the Queen, walking 2 steps behind her, never seeking the spotlight for himself. His strength had been quiet but unwavering, like the steady needle of his compass that always pointed true north. Sarah watched as William opened the compass, its needle immediately swinging to find magnetic north. Even after all these years, it remained accurate and dependable, just like the man who had owned it. Philip's influence on William had been profound, teaching him that duty wasn't a burden to bear, but an honor to embrace. "He wanted you to remember that even when the storms of kingship seem overwhelming, you always have an inner compass to guide you home," Sarah shared, repeating words Philip had spoken to her just weeks before his passing. "Your conscience, your love for your people, and your commitment to service will always show you the right path." William nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Throughout history, monarchs had faced impossible decisions, moments when the right choice wasn't clear, when the weight of the crown seemed too heavy to bear. In those times, this compass would remind him of his grandfather's steady presence, his unwavering moral direction, and his dedication to something greater than himself. The compass would be discreetly attached inside his ceremonial jacket, positioned over his heart. Like his mother's handkerchief, it would remain hidden from public view, but its presence would be felt with every breath, every heartbeat, every step toward the throne. The media and spectators would see the grandeur of the ceremony, but they wouldn't know about these deeply personal talismans that would give him strength. As Sarah began helping him with the first layers of his ceremonial attire, William thought about the conversations he'd had with his grandfather over the years. Philip had always been honest about the challenges of royal life, never sugarcoating the sacrifices that would be required. But he had also shown William that those sacrifices were meaningful when made in service to others. The white silk shirt William now wore had been made by the same tailors who had served the royal family for generations. Every stitch was perfect, every detail considered. But it was what lay beneath the grandeur that mattered most. The symbols of love and guidance that would anchor him to his roots, even as he stepped into an uncertain future. Outside, the crowds continued to grow, their excitement building with each passing hour. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment, preparing to broadcast this historic moment to billions of viewers. Royal correspondents spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the significance of the day, but they could only guess at the personal story unfolding in William's private chambers. William's phone buzzed with messages from world leaders, celebrities, and friends, all offering their congratulations and best wishes. But the messages that meant the most came from ordinary people, teachers, nurses, veterans, farmers, all expressing their hope and confidence in his leadership. These were the people he would serve, the faces he would carry in his heart as he made difficult decisions in the years ahead. Catherine appeared briefly at his door, radiant in her own preparation, offering him an encouraging smile that spoke volumes. Their children's laughter could be heard echoing through the palace corridors as they practiced their procession one final time. George, as the heir apparent, bore his own small burden of understanding what this day meant for his future. But for now, he was still just a boy excited to be part of something special. Sarah continued her work with the patience and precision of someone who understood that she was helping to create history. Each button, each fold of fabric, each adjustment was made with the knowledge that these moments would be remembered and studied for generations to come. Photography would capture the visual magnificence, but the emotional significance of each hidden element would remain a family secret, passed down through whispered stories and cherished memories. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, casting everything in a golden glow that seemed almost mystical. William caught sight of himself in the mirror again and was struck by how much he resembled his father, King Charles, at the same age. The weight of succession, the continuation of a 1,000-year-old institution, suddenly felt very real and very personal. As the compass settled against his chest and his mother's handkerchief was carefully tucked into his pocket, William felt a profound connection to all who had come before him. Their love, their wisdom, and their examples would guide him through whatever challenges lay ahead. He was ready to carry their legacy forward while writing his own chapter in the long story of the British monarchy. Sarah's hands moved with practiced grace as she reached for the third item, and William's eyes immediately filled with recognition and overwhelming emotion. Nestled in soft velvet was his grandmother's favorite brooch, the one she had worn to countless state occasions throughout her remarkable 70-year reign. The diamonds and sapphires caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls of his chamber. But this wasn't just any piece of jewelry. This was the brooch Queen Elizabeth had worn on her wedding day in 1947, a gift from her beloved father, King George VI. She had worn it during her coronation, at the births of her children, and during some of the most significant moments in British history. For decades, it had been her constant companion, a source of strength and connection to her father's love. "The Queen specifically requested that you wear this today," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She said that her father's blessing should continue through you, that his love for the monarchy and for Britain should live on in your reign." William's hands shook as he held the brooch. He remembered seeing it on his grandmother's lapel during state dinners, official photographs, and quiet family gatherings. She would unconsciously touch it during difficult speeches or challenging moments, as if drawing strength from her father's memory. Now, that same source of comfort would be his. The brooch would be pinned inside his ceremonial jacket, directly over his heart, joining his mother's handkerchief and his grandfather's compass. 3 generations of love and guidance would accompany him to the throne, invisible to the world but powerfully present in his heart. Each item represented a different aspect of what it meant to be royal: Diana's compassion, Philip's steadfast duty, and Elizabeth's unwavering dedication. As Sarah carefully secured the brooch, William closed his eyes and could almost feel his grandmother's presence in the room. He remembered the countless hours they had spent together, especially in her final years, when she had shared her wisdom about leadership, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. She had prepared him not just with formal training, but with love, patience, and her own remarkable example. The weight of history seemed to settle around William's shoulders like an invisible cloak. This brooch had witnessed the transformation of the British Empire into the Commonwealth, had been present during the moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and countless other moments that had shaped the modern world. It had absorbed the hopes, fears, and triumphs of one of history's greatest monarchs, and now it would begin a new chapter with him. Through the palace windows, the sound of military bands practicing their ceremonial music drifted upward. The household cavalry was preparing for the grand procession, their horses stepping high and proud, their uniforms gleaming in the morning sun. Every detail of the ceremony had been planned with precision that would have made his grandmother proud. But William knew she would have been most pleased by the personal touches, the hidden connections to family and love. Sarah stepped back to admire her work, and William caught sight of himself in the full-length mirror. He looked every inch a king, but more importantly, he felt the presence of those who had loved him most. Their strength flowed through him, their wisdom whispered in his ear, their examples lighting his path forward. The brooch seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and William wondered if this was how his grandmother had felt all those years, carrying her father's love wherever duty called her. King George VI had died young, never seeing his daughter's extraordinary reign, but his influence had shaped every decision she made, every speech she gave, every moment she served her people. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of William's children, who had come to see their father in his ceremonial attire. Prince George's eyes widened with wonder. Princess Charlotte gasped with delight, and little Prince Louis clapped his hands with joy. They understood that something momentous was happening, that their father was about to become something more than just their dad. "You look like a real king, Papa," Charlotte said with the innocent honesty that only children possess. Her words brought tears to William's eyes because, in that moment, he realized he finally felt like one too. The love of his family, both living and departed, had transformed him from a man carrying a burden into a king ready to serve. Catherine appeared behind the children, radiant in her own ceremonial dress, and the look that passed between husband and wife spoke of shared understanding, mutual support, and unshakable love. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would honor the past while building the future. As the family shared this precious moment, William felt the brooch warm against his chest, as if his grandmother was giving her final blessing to the scene before her. The children she had loved so dearly, the daughter-in-law she had welcomed with open arms, and the grandson she had prepared to carry on her life's work, were all gathered together, united in love and purpose. The time for departure was approaching, but William felt a deep sense of peace settling over him. He was not walking to his coronation alone. He carried with him the love, wisdom, and strength of those who had shaped him, and he walked toward a future where their legacy would live, on through his service to the British people and the Commonwealth nations. The grand procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey began exactly as planned, with military precision that had been rehearsed countless times. William sat in the gold state coach, the same magnificent vehicle that had carried monarchs to their coronations for over 2 centuries. The coach rocked gently as the 8 Windsor gray horses stepped in perfect unison, their hooves creating a rhythmic melody on the London streets. But as thousands of people lined the procession route, something unexpected began to happen. Word had somehow spread through the crowd about the hidden tributes William carried with him. Social media posts from palace staff, overheard conversations, and the intuitive understanding that comes from loving someone deeply had created a ripple of awareness that spread like wildfire through the gathering. People began pulling out photographs, of Princess Diana, holding them high above their heads as the coach passed. Mothers lifted their children on their shoulders, whispering stories of the people's princess and her sons who had stolen the nation's heart. Veterans straightened their backs and saluted not just their new king, but the memory of Prince Philip, whose naval service they honored and respected. The sight of thousands of Diana's photographs being held aloft created a sea of images that caught the sunlight and sent sparkles dancing through the air. Television commentators struggled to maintain their composure as they described the spontaneous tribute, their professional voices cracking with emotion as they witnessed something unscripted and authentic unfolding before their eyes. William could see the photographs through the coach windows, and for a moment he was overwhelmed by the love and remembrance flowing from his people. They understood what this day meant to him on a personal level. They knew he carried not just the weight of the crown, but the memory of a mother who had shown them all what it meant to lead with compassion and warmth. Inside the coach, Catherine reached over and squeezed her husband's hand, her own eyes bright, with tears she was trying not to shed before the ceremony began. Their children sat quietly, somehow understanding the magnitude of the moment even at their young ages. Prince George looked remarkably composed for a boy his age, already showing signs of the strength he would need for his own future role. The route to Westminster Abbey took them past some of Diana's favorite places, the hospital where she had visited AIDS patients when the world still feared to touch them, the shelter where she had served Christmas dinner to the homeless, the school where she had knelt down to speak with children at their eye level. Each location held memories that the crowd seemed to sense and honor. As they approached the Abbey, the crowds grew even thicker, their cheers becoming a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient building. People had traveled from across the Commonwealth, spending their life savings to witness this historic moment. They carried flags from every corner of the former empire, now united in friendship and shared values rather than colonial rule. The military bands playing along the route had spontaneously begun including some of Diana's favorite pieces in their repertoire. The music seemed to carry her spirit along with the procession, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and celebratory, respectful of tradition yet warm with human emotion. William could feel the three precious items against his chest and, in his pocket, his mother's handkerchief, his grandfather's compass, and his grandmother's brooch. They seemed to pulse with energy, connecting him not just to his family's memory, but to the millions of people lining the streets who had loved them too. The monarchy belonged to the people as much as to the royal family, and today, that truth was visible in every face, every wave, every tear of joy. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey came into view, and William's breath caught in his throat. This was where his parents had married in 1981, where his grandmother had been crowned in 1953, where kings and queens had been made for nearly 1,000 years. The weight of history seemed to settle around the coach like morning mist, beautiful and mysterious and profoundly moving. Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the great doors of the Abbey, his ceremonial robes flowing in the gentle breeze. Behind him, the church was filled with representatives from every nation, every faith, every walk of life. This coronation would be different from those in the past, more inclusive, more representative of the modern world, but still rooted in the ancient traditions that connected William to his ancestors. As the coach came to a stop and the steps were lowered, William took a deep breath and prepared to step out into his destiny. The crowd's cheers reached a crescendo that seemed to lift the very sky. Somewhere in that sea of faces were people who had known and loved his mother, who had served alongside his grandfather, who had respected and admired his grandmother. He was not walking into the Abbey alone. He carried their love with him, their wisdom in his heart, and their examples as his guide. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin was now a man ready to serve his nation, carrying forward the best of what they had taught him while writing his own chapter in the long story of the British Crown. The moment had arrived. History was waiting, and William was ready to embrace it with all the love, courage, and dedication that 3 generations of his family had instilled in him. Inside Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and reverence. 2,000 guests from around the world sat in perfect silence as William made his way down the ancient aisle, each footstep echoing through the sacred space where kings had been crowned for nearly a millennium. The Gothic arches soared overhead like prayers made of stone, and centuries of history seemed to whisper from every corner of the magnificent building. Television cameras captured every moment for the billions watching around the globe. But they couldn't convey the spiritual weight that filled the air, the sense that something profound and eternal was taking place. World leaders, celebrities, and common citizens who had won lottery tickets to attend all shared the same expression of awe as they witnessed the transformation of a man into a monarch. As William approached the altar, he could feel the 3 treasures he carried pulsing against his heart like a second heartbeat. His mother's handkerchief seemed to whisper words of compassion and kindness. His grandfather's compass reminded him to stay true to his moral direction, no matter how difficult the path ahead. His grandmother's brooch carried the wisdom of decades of faithful service and unwavering duty. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ancient ceremony with words that had been spoken at coronations for centuries, but today they carried special meaning. Sirs, I here present unto you King William, your undoubted king. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same? The great cry of God save the King that rose from the congregation seemed to lift the very roof of the abbey, but William barely heard it because at that moment something extraordinary happened. As he knelt before the altar, he felt a presence so strong and so loving that tears began to stream down his face, despite his determination to maintain his composure. It was as if his mother, his grandfather, and his grandmother were all there, with him, their hands resting gently on his shoulders, their love surrounding him like a warm embrace. The congregation, seeing their new king's emotional response, began to weep as well. This wasn't just a political ceremony or a historical pageant. This was a son honoring the memory of those who had raised him, loved him, and prepared him for this moment. Catherine, watching from her place in the congregation with their children, felt her own tears flowing freely. She understood better than anyone what this moment cost William, how much strength it took to carry such personal grief and love on such a public stage. Their children sat quietly beside her, somehow understanding that they were witnessing something sacred and profound. The most moving moment came when the Archbishop placed the St. Edward's crown on William's head. As the weight of the ancient gold settled on his brow, William closed his eyes and made a silent promise to the spirits he felt surrounding him. He would serve with Diana's compassion, Philip's steadfast duty, and Elizabeth's unwavering dedication. Their legacy would live on through his reign. The congregation fell completely silent, and in that silence, many people later swore they felt the presence of those who were gone but not forgotten. The love that filled Westminster Abbey at that moment was almost tangible, connecting not just William to his family, but the entire gathering to the deeper meaning of service, sacrifice, and love. When William finally stood as king, crowned, and anointed, he looked out over the congregation with eyes that held both profound sadness and incredible determination. He was no longer just carrying his own hopes and dreams. He was carrying the hopes of his mother for a more compassionate monarchy, his grandfather's vision of dutiful service, and his grandmother's example of lifelong dedication to her people. The traditional fanfare that followed seemed to echo not just through the Abbey, but across the entire Commonwealth and around the world. Church bells began ringing from every corner of Britain, and similar celebrations erupted in countries that still recognized the British monarch as their head of state. The sound created a symphony of celebration that spanned continents and time zones. But perhaps the most touching moment came when little Prince Louis, unable to contain himself any longer, whispered just loud enough for the microphones to catch, "That's my daddy!" His innocent words broke the formal solemnity and reminded everyone that beneath the crown and ceremonial robes, William remained a loving father, devoted husband, and man who had been shaped by both tremendous loss and tremendous love. As the ceremony continued with prayers, blessings, and ancient rituals, William felt a peace settling over him that he hadn't expected. The items hidden in his clothing seemed to warm against his skin, as if approving of the promises he had made and the path he had chosen. He was no longer the grieving boy who had lost his mother too soon, or the young man struggling with his destiny. He was a king, ready to serve, carrying the best of his family's legacy forward into an uncertain but hope-filled future. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. As King William looked out at his people, both those in the abbey and the millions watching around the world, he knew that every decision he made, every speech he gave, every act of service he performed would honor the memory of those who had brought him to this moment. As King William emerged from Westminster Abbey, the crown upon his head catching the afternoon sunlight, the world witnessed something unprecedented in royal history. The crowds that had gathered to celebrate his coronation were not just cheering for their new monarch. They were celebrating the love story that had brought him to this moment, the family bonds that transcended death, and the promise of a reign built on compassion, duty, and remembrance. The return procession to Buckingham Palace became an impromptu celebration of life and memory. People threw flower petals into the air, creating clouds of color that danced in the breeze. Street musicians played songs that Diana had loved. Veterans saluted in memory of Philip's service, and families shared stories of the Queen's long reign, with children who would grow up knowing only King William's rule. What moved the world most was the moment when William, now wearing the imperial state crown, paused during his ride back to the palace and pressed his hand to his heart. Television commentators fell silent as they realized what he was doing. He was acknowledging the presence of those he carried with him, feeling for the handkerchief, compass, and brooch that remained hidden but powerfully present. The gesture was captured by photographers from around the world, and within minutes, the image was circulating on social media with hashtags like "Da Love Never Dies," "Carrying Them With Me," and "King of Hearts." People began sharing their own stories of loved ones they had lost, talismans they carried, and memories that gave them strength. William's private moment of connection had become a universal symbol of how love transcends death. Back at Buckingham Palace, as the royal family gathered on the balcony for the traditional appearance before the crowds, something magical happened. The sea of people stretching down the Mall began singing "God Save the King," with voices so unified and powerful that birds took flight from the palace roof. But then, spontaneously, the crowd transitioned into singing "Candle in the Wind," Elton John's tribute to Diana, their voices carrying across London like a prayer. William stood at the front of the balcony, his wife and children beside him, tears streaming down his face as he listened to his people honor his mother's memory. The crown on his head no longer felt heavy. It felt like a bridge connecting him to all who had come before and all who would come after. Catherine slipped her hand into his, and their children moved closer, creating a tableau of love and unity that would be remembered for generations. The hidden treasures against his heart seemed to pulse with warmth, and William felt, more than ever, the presence of his loved ones. His mother's compassion would guide his interactions with the people, especially those who were suffering or marginalized. His grandfather's moral compass would keep him true to his principles even when facing difficult decisions. His grandmother's brooch would remind him that service to others was the highest calling, worthy of a lifetime's devotion. As the sun began to set over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, William realized that this coronation had been different from any in history. It had been a celebration not just of monarchy, but of family, memory, and the enduring power of love. The formal ceremonies and ancient rituals had been transformed by the deeply personal elements he had chosen to include, creating something both timeless and completely unique. Later that evening, in the privacy of his study, William carefully removed the 3 precious items that had accompanied him through the day. He held each one for a moment, feeling their weight not just in his hands but in his heart. Tomorrow he would begin the work of being king, making decisions that would affect millions of people, carrying forward the monarchy into a new era. But tonight he simply sat quietly and felt grateful. Grateful for a mother who had shown him that royal duty could be combined with genuine warmth and compassion. Grateful for a grandfather who had demonstrated that strength could be quiet, that service could be selfless, and that love could be expressed through action rather than words. Grateful for a grandmother who had given him the ultimate example of what it meant to dedicate one's entire life to something greater than oneself. The crown sat on a nearby table, no longer just a symbol of power, but a reminder of responsibility, legacy, and the continuing story of a family that had chosen to serve. As King William prepared for bed, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult decisions, and the weight of leading a nation through uncertain times. But he also knew that he would never face those challenges alone. He carried with him not just the love of his living family, but the wisdom, strength, and examples of those who had gone before. His mother's handkerchief would remind him to lead with kindness. His grandfather's compass would keep him on the right path, and his grandmother's brooch would inspire him to serve with dignity and grace. The coronation was over, but the reign of King William had just begun. And in that beginning was the promise that love, once given, never truly ends. It simply finds new ways to guide us forward, even when those we love can no longer walk beside us. The millions who had watched around the world understood that. They had witnessed not just the crowning of a king, but the triumph of love over loss, memory over forgetting, and hope over despair.